Well, good morning, Cypress. Good morning. Hey, my name's Eric, by the way. I'm the pastor here. In case I haven't had a chance to meet you, and if you're new or visiting with us, like Leah said, I want to welcome you. It's always good to be together, and of course, we're always excited to have our online audience with us as well. I do want to offer just one quick note to what Leah said, because she said, I think we had 20 kids at the youth kickoff last Sunday. It was more like 25, and so as a pastor, I want to make sure we get that number. In fact, I would have just called it 50. Just round it up. But we decided to keep it true, 25-ish, around that mark. But anyway, we are so excited to see what's happening in our student ministries, as Leah said. But hey, we just started this new series last week called Catch Your Breath, right? And as we said last week, and as we continue into this series, really it's going to be a journey that we take together over these next few weeks as we discover and learn what it looks like to live a slow down life in this hurry up world in which we live. And last week I opened up this series with just this basic kind of fundamental assumption that I think is true really for all of us, and it doesn't matter what your background looks like, what kind of, if you're a person of faith or not. I think it's true for us regardless that all of us, we have this vision for the life that we want to live and the kind of person that we want to be, right? In fact, just think we have this, inside of us, there's like this picture, this image in our mind of this life that we're moving toward and the kind of person that we want to become along the way. Now, if I were to just ask you, what kind of person you want to be? What is that vision you have for your life, the kind of person that you want to become? I think most of us would probably start to name the character traits of the people that we admire, right? In fact, for an example, we might say something like, well, I want to be the kind of person who's just kind and generous, because those are things we admire in other people. Right? Or we might even say things like, well, I want to be the kind of person that will do anything for anyone, who's always there when you need them, right? Because we like those quality traits in others. We might even use words like I want to be dependable or trustworthy or loyal, right? And as often as we would say these kinds of things, what we're really saying is that we want to be the kind of people who love well, and in fact, we have this vision to live a life of love. And some of you might push back on that a little bit and say, well, let's not get carried away, because there's a lot of people in my life that, I don't really like all that much, and so I'm not sure I really want to be a person of love to those people, and that's being honest, I guess, that's fair. But I think if we could just even kind of narrow the focus a little bit to the context of just our family, right? Think about your kids, your spouse, your extended family members. I think even if we just focused on that, we would say all of us, I think, we want to be the kind of people who love well and live a life of love. Right? And in fact, maybe a better way to say it is that this is how we want to be remembered. Long after we're gone and all that's left of us are just the stories that are told about us. We want the people closest to us to say, yeah, they were the kind of people who loved well and lived a life of love. And if that's true for us, I think maybe the single greatest challenge for any one of us to ever reach that vision for our lives is this. And this goes back to a bottom line that I introduced last week. And like I said, we're going to keep coming back to this again and again throughout this series. And I put it back on the screen for us as a reminder that the speed at which many of us are living just isn't compatible with the life that we envision. And to put a finer point on it for the teaching this morning, the hurried pace at which most of us are living is not compatible. It's incompatible with the life of love that we envision. And so just to illustrate how this shows up in my life, let me give you a little insight into my personality. And this is a side of me that I know most people have not seen. I'm going to give you a little insight here on me, and I'm going to do quite a bit of self-reflection with us this morning. I hope that's okay. But anyway, it was interesting because over this past week, I got a phone call from somebody here at Cypress, and they said, one of the things that they've noticed about me is that I'm always calm. Like I always just seem calm in the midst of everything that's going on, which really was encouraging. Right? And that's what he was trying to do. He's encouraging me, and I thought that's really cool that he sees me that way. But the truth is, and the reality is, that he's never seen me on those mornings when I'm trying to get the family ready for a big trip, especially when it involves catching a flight, And I would say on those mornings, the word calm is not an accurate description of me and my demeanor in those moments, right? And so just to get, in fact, I told Amanda that I was thinking about sharing this with you, and she said this, and I'm quoting her. She said, that is the worst. And she's talking about me. And she's not wrong, okay? She's not wrong, because on those mornings, I have a tendency to become this, type A, hyper-driven and just, laser-focused taskmaster, right? And I've got one thing on my mind. There's only one thing that matters, and it's getting the family out the door and on the road on schedule, right? Because I've got it all planned out, and it's a beautiful plan, and it'll work as long as we get on the road on time. But there's always a lot to do on those mornings, and you know this. You've got to get yourself ready, of course. Everybody else has to get ready. There's usually some last-minute packing, and then everything's got to get loaded. And so I am focused on just the necessary tasks, and I'm in hustle mode, and there is no time for any interruptions whatsoever, because that's not been factored into the equation, right? And so if somebody is not feeling well on one of those mornings, well, that's just too bad. They're going to have to deal with it. And I remind them it's a rule, there's no throwing up in the car, right? Or somebody else has a problem that they need help with. Well, I don't have time for that. So you're going to have to figure out that problem on your own. And by the way, you've got exactly 12 minutes, and I remind them of that. And usually this is around the time when Amanda decides that she needs to do one last cleaning of the entire house before we leave. Right? Cleaning the kitchen. We're minutes from walking out the door, and she's cleaning the kitchen, cleaning the bathrooms and the bedrooms and all this. And we all appreciate coming home to a clean house, but I'm thinking, is this the best time? And I'm trying to keep everybody moving and on schedule. This is the other thing that happens, and without fail, every single time, I get everything out to the car. I've got the back of the SUV loaded, and everything's in there, and it's it's a thing of beauty. Like a work of art. I pride myself in my loading abilities. I've maximized every cubic inch of the trunk, right? So I usually take a step back and I admire it for just a minute, and then I close the trunk, and then I turn around, and there's Amanda with one more bag. One more bag. And I did double and triple checking around the house. I've never actually even seen that bag. Where did that bag even come from? And now I've got to figure out how I'm going to work it into this meticulously loaded trunk. Well, she's not here this morning, so I felt safe throwing her under the bus. She's out of town with a friend. But also I told her I might say this, and she gave me her permission. So that's really what's going on here. But as you can see, in those moments, I've not always been the most loving or gracious person, right? And needless to say, after all of that, after we go through all of it and we get everybody loaded and we're on the road, usually more or less on schedule, nobody's feeling loved by Dad. And I'm getting better at this, right? I'm growing in this area of my life, but this is the struggle. This is the struggle for us, because love is who we want to be, right? It's how I think most of us would say we want to live. But if you're like me, we keep finding ourselves in these moments, either as a spouse or as a parent, or even sometimes as a friend and a neighbor. And love just isn't, at least not always, maybe not even most of the time, what the people around us are getting from us. And so why is that? Why is that? Well, it goes back to something we talked about last week that I believe so many of us have just adapted to. And like it's just become a normal way of life, this culture of hurry and busyness and overload. And hurry is the antithesis of love. And I put that on the screens for us today so we wouldn't miss that, because it's so true. Hurry is the antithesis of love. Because hurry does something within us that actually undermines and sabotages love. Because hurry keeps us and pushes us to move at speeds that are just not compatible with love. And some of this really started to click for me several years ago when I was sitting in an interview shortly before I joined the staff at my last church up in Indiana. This was about 4 years ago. And as I was sitting in this interview, the staff were asking me different questions. And one of the staff members asked me this question that I thought was so insightful. I thought it was brilliant. She asked me, she said, "So what are you like when you're under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress?" She asked me this. And I thought, man, this is so good. Because, up to this point, when you're working through an interview process and candidating for a position like this, everybody had already seen me at my best, right? That's what we do in these moments. We put our best selves forward. But she was asking, so what are you like at your worst? Right? And this is so good because she really wanted to get to know me, but she was also trying to prepare herself for what it's like, and what to expect when it comes to working with me on a daily basis, especially on these really bad days when I'm at my worst. And I knew all too well what these days look like. And usually what leads to those days when I'm under a lot of pressure and under a lot of stress. Usually those are days when I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with everything that's on my plate. And usually those are days when I know I've probably allowed too many appointments and meetings on my schedule. And often those are days when the tank is already running pretty low, if you know what I mean. And so I processed all of this in the moment, and I knew exactly what she was talking about. And so I answered her question, and I told her very honestly what was true for me at the time and what I think is true for a lot of us in those moments. But when I reflected back on this, it revealed something to me that is far more alarming than I realized at the time. Because I told her, I said, well, in those days, when I'm feeling all this pressure, a lot of stress, usually I'm going to be a little more irritable. Right? I might be a little more sensitive to just careless comments that come out in conversation. I might find myself just hypersensitive to those. And I'm going to be impatient. I'm probably going to be a little edgy with disruptions and things like that. And I might even be a little shorter and sharper in my tone than I intend to be in my responses to people. And honestly, on those days, I have a tendency, I knew this to be true about myself, I have this tendency to just keep my head down and my door closed and just focused on the task at hand. Now, when I thought back on that conversation and my response to that question, I realized something. That every single one of those things that I just described, I mean, irritability and just being hypersensitive to comments and criticisms and just kind of this just like indifference toward the people around me and things like that. I mean, these are all symptoms of what's been called hurry sickness in our modern, fast-paced society. Hurry sickness. Have you heard of this before? No, okay. Hurry sickness. It's this time pressure that probably most of us feel in any given moment on any given day. Right? It's this constant state of feeling rushed and anxious, and like we have to hurry through our tasks in order to get everything done in the course of a day. It's just hurry sickness. And if this describes our day-to-day, like if hurry sickness is a real part of our experience, then no doubt it's showing up in our lives and how we react to and respond to the people in our circles. One pastor I've read over the years said it this way. He said, hurry is not just a disordered schedule. Hurry is a disordered heart. Hurry is a disordered heart. I mean, which is to say, right, that in our hurried way of life and under the weight of these pressures, we've failed to keep the main things, right? And we've somehow lost sight of what's really important, what truly matters in this life. And now suddenly this impossible schedule that I'm trying to keep and this unrealistic to-do list that I'm trying to grind out every day, I mean, these things have somehow become a higher priority than the people right in front of me. Because, I mean, there's simply just not, I mean, the course of a day, there's just no time to fit everyone and everything into all of it. And so often the people end up getting the short end of the deal. And this has drastic implications on the kind of spouses we are, the kind of parents that we are, the kind of friends and neighbors that we are. Because relationships on any level are based in love. And love takes time. You simply cannot hurry love, and that is why hurry is the antithesis of love. And if love is truly who we want to be and how we want to live, then we're going to have to slow down. We have to catch our breath and learn to live at the slow speed of love. So there's a scene in the scriptures when Jesus is confronted by this issue of hurry, and he has to deal with it, and he deals with it in such a loving and gracious way. And so I want to look at this together with you this morning, and we find it in the book of Mark, chapter 5. Now, before we get to the portion that I'm going to read for us today, I want to just kind of set the stage and catch us up on everything that's going on here, because Jesus has just returned to this village called Capernaum. This is kind of his home base of operation, and he's just returned to Capernaum, which is right on the shore of this big lake in the region called Galilee. And so as he arrives, there's this massive crowd. I mean, hundreds, probably thousands of people that just swarm into the village there, and they're surrounding Jesus and his 12 apprentices who are there with them, and they're just pressing in all around him. And now there are two people in the crowd that day. Two people who are about to become central figures in this story. And one of them is a man named Jairus. He's the prominent leader in the local synagogue there. And the other person is an anonymous woman. We never learn her name. We don't know what her name is. But both of them are in the crowd that day because both of them have an urgent need in their life, and both of them are absolutely convinced that Jesus is their last hope. And so as we make our way into the narrative, Jairus is the one who's able to push his way through the crowd, and he gets to Jesus first. And when he gets to Jesus, he explains to him that his 12-year-old daughter is on the verge of death. And he's desperately pleading with Jesus, explaining that, he just believes because he is so desperate. And he just believes that if Jesus would just come back to his house with him, and if he would just lay his hands on his dying daughter, and if Jesus would just pray for his daughter, then that would be enough to cure her, and it would spare her life. And so he's desperately pleading with Jesus, and Jesus responds. And so he gets up with his 12 apprentices, and they start making their way through this just incredibly dense crowd back to Jairus' house. So at this point, we need to just try to use our imaginations to understand what's going on here, because Jairus he was a father at his wit's end, making one last-ditch effort to save his daughter's life, and even now her life was hanging in the balance. And so this was not a calm, leisurely stroll through this crowd on that afternoon or that day, whatever time it was. I just have to imagine that Jairus was frantic. He was just, falling all over himself, trying to get out of this crowd with Jesus and his apprentices, and then something happens. Jesus feels something, and he stops in the middle of all of this. Because at that moment, in the midst of this frantic and hurried walk through this unbelievably dense crowd, this anonymous woman in the crowd has now made her way to Jesus. And this woman, as we learn about her, that she has been suffering for 12 years from a physical condition that has tormented her physically. It has left her an outcast socially. It has bankrupted her financially. And she is at her wit's end and desperate enough to believe that if she could just get close enough to Jesus, like she's not even going to try to get in his way, she's not going to try to meet Jesus or talk to Jesus. She just thinks, if I can get close enough to him to just touch his clothes, then that would be enough to heal me, and she would finally be free from all of this. And as she squeezes and pushes through the crowd, Jesus happens to be coming by, and she reaches through the tangle and the surge of the people between her and Jesus, and she gets just close enough, and she's able to reach out and touch just the back of his robe. And at that moment, she's healed. And she can feel it. She knows it. And at the same time, Jesus feels this healing power flow through him and out of him and into someone in the crowd, but he doesn't know who. And as I read this for you, pay attention to the number of times you come across the word who. Because Jesus is very concerned for who is in the crowd with him that day. All right, starting in verse 30. Here's what it says. This is Mark chapter 5, verse 30. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" Now, we need to pause here for just a second because, can you just sense the hurry in the disciples' response here? Can you just sense and feel their hurry? Because, this desperate father is trying to get back to his dying daughter with Jesus, and the disciples, they all feel that, right? They feel the urgency, and they're caught up in it as well because, in their minds, Jesus, they have full confidence that Jesus can heal this poor girl. And so in their minds, they've got to get back to her as quickly as possible. Like, they need to keep moving. So they're all in this hurried state. There's no time to waste. And I know you and I would probably do the exact same thing in this situation. We would be the exact same way in a moment like this. And when Jesus stops in the middle of this crowd because someone touched him, they can't believe it. And you can almost hear the panic and the agitation in their response to Jesus. Like Jesus, what are you talking about? Seriously, you're gonna ask who touched you? You're surrounded by hundreds of people right now. There's probably dozens of people who touched you, and yet you're going to stop in the middle of all of this and ask who touched you? But as I said a minute ago, as I studied this passage, the word who just kept jumping out at me. Because Jesus wasn't just concerned about what needed to be done. He was concerned about who was there in the crowd. Specifically, who had touched him. And even just that word who reveals that there's a person at the center of this, right? There's a human being. There's a soul in need of healing. And in the midst of this vast sea of faces, Jesus wanted to know who it was. And his apprentices protested. They disagreed. They disapproved. And they tried to hurry Jesus. Verse 32. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Now again, I want us to try to just get into our imagination a little bit, try to picture this in the middle of this chaos. And with the clamor of the crowd all around them in the midst of this frantic and desperate hurrying, I pictured Jairus and the disciples just standing around Jesus watching in disbelief. Right? Their frustration and their disapproval and their desperation, evident on their faces, and just waving wildly their impatient gestures for Jesus to keep moving and to hurry up. But Jesus in this moment seems to be oblivious to all of that. And he pauses. And he slows down and turns around because he's determined to know who it was. And he's determined to see who had touched him. And when he discovers who the person is, he turns to face her and he moves toward her. And I just imagine that he leaned down closer to her just a bit and lifted her chin until her eyes could meet his. And then just very gently placed a hand on her shoulder. And he said to her, verse 34, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." In the presence of Jesus, this woman who will forever live in anonymity moved from a nameless, faceless who in the crowd to a loved and seen daughter. Healed and made whole in the presence of Jesus, freed from her suffering. And in this beautiful moment, Jesus teaches us, and it's on the screens for us, love will never let hurry stand in the way of who is standing in front of you. Love will never let hurry stand in the way of who is standing in front of you. And Jesus, he would not let the expectations of others or the demands that were placed upon him by others, he would not let the hurry of those that he was with and surrounded by keep him from who was standing in front of him. Because she was important enough to Jesus that he was willing to pause in that moment and just slow down long enough to engage her, fully present to her in that moment, so that she would understand that not only was she healed physically, but she was seen and she was loved, because love will not let hurry stand in the way of who is standing in front of you. Jesus himself established love as the highest value in this full life that we talked about last week, this full life that he came so that we might have. Love is the highest value. And when some of the religious leaders, this is a different time in the scriptures, but when some of the religious leaders tried to trap Jesus with this trick question, like, Jesus, so what is the greatest commandment in all of the scriptures? He left them speechless when he answered immediately. He said that, I'll tell you the greatest commandment, it's to love God with everything you have. Like your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Everything you have. But then he stunned them when he came back with the second one, and he said, it's just like the first. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus not only taught this, but as we've just seen, he lived it. He showed us what it looks like to live a life of love, even in the midst of a hurried and chaotic life. Jesus showed us that it requires us to slow down. And even when everything and everyone around us is moving at the speed of hurry, we can slow down and take our time with those who matter. Because love is painfully time-consuming. And we all know this, right? There's no shortcuts to love. There's no life hacks. There's no open AI or chat GPT that can help speed up the process of love. Love moves at a slower speed. In Cypress, everything that we desire to be as a church in this community, and really everything that we desire to be as individuals, in fact, everything that Jesus calls us to be through the scriptures. Just think about, sharing our lives with others in rich, authentic, Jesus-centered community. Or walking alongside other Jesus followers to help them navigate the challenges and the struggles of their day-to-day lives and their faith and how they reconcile all that. Even just serving with all the gifts and the passions that God has placed within us. And as Jesus said, loving our neighbors, building relationships with them. It all takes an enormous amount of time. Because love moves slowly, and hurry will always be our greatest challenge to living into that kind of life. So Tuesday night this past week, I was coming home from an elder meeting, and it was kind of late in the evening, and as I was pulling into our driveway, I noticed that our neighbor across the street, Bob, was standing out in his front yard doing some stuff, and I've been praying for Bob and Emily I've been praying for them on a pretty regular basis, just asking God to open up some opportunities where I could get to know them a little bit better and just begin to build a relationship with them. And so as I pulled into my driveway Tuesday night, I thought there was this little thought in my mind. I thought, well, here's an opportunity. But Tuesday night, I was really tired. And I know, what's my excuse, right? I'm a pastor. I pretty much work just one day a week. And so I'm so glad you're laughing at that. But Tuesday had just been a long day, and it had coming out of a long weekend. And so as I sat in the driveway in that moment, I just felt tired. And if I could be really transparent with you, there was just a little bit of hurry in my soul that night. And I was kind of aware of it, but I also just kind of justified it because I thought, well, it's hurry because I want to get inside where I can slow down and I can rest. Right? I mean, this is what I preached about Sunday. I want to make sure I'm practicing what I'm preaching. But then the next morning I got up and I opened this teaching and I started developing this teaching, and that came back to me, and I just thought, oh man, why didn't I just walk across the street and say hi? Like how long would it actually take me to just walk across the street and just take advantage of that opportunity to make another connection and just to get to know him a little bit better? Because that's the kind of person that I want to be, right? I mean, that's what I envision for my life. I want to be, as Jesus said, I want to love my neighbors. But hurry will always undermine our desire to love as Jesus loved. And hurry will always keep me and you and all of us from living out this vision to be known by our love. Because love takes time, and it requires a sacrifice of our time. Because to truly love means to give something of ourselves away, to give our attention away, to give our energy away, to give our free time away, to give our life away. And the greatest challenge that will threaten to keep us from loving the people in our lives like this is a hurried soul. And I know a lot of you are way better at this than I am. But I know that others of you are challenged by this like I am. So let me give you just one practical step that I think we can all take this week as just a way of slowing down and catching our breath and loving well. And here it is. And again, I put it on the screens for us. Move toward the interruptions. Move toward the interruption. I mean, this is exactly what Jesus did in that moment, isn't it? I mean, he didn't rush past it, and he didn't make this like half effort to accept it, but he slowed down, he stopped, and he moved toward the interruption. And all of us already know this, right? I mean, life is full of interruptions. In fact, I would guess that you probably have already had at least one interruption today. And there's probably going to be more. In fact, as you move throughout the week, interruptions are coming your way, whether it's one of your kids or someone at work or just an unexpected phone call. Interruptions are coming. So rather than rush past it, choose in that moment to move toward it. And listen, for some of us, this won't come naturally, right? I mean, this will require some effort. So here's what we have to do in these moments. If you're like me, here's what we have to do. We have to pause, and we have to just take a second to catch our breath. And we have to say a quiet prayer to Jesus to remove the hurry in our souls. And if this just grinds your gears and it's not working, then we have to try asking ourselves, is the task that I'm being delayed from more important to me than the person who's delaying it? And is my response to them in this moment communicating love to them? And then as a gesture of love and just full surrender to that moment, just physically move toward the interruption. Turn your body to face them and choose to be fully present to them in that moment out of love. And listen, I get it. We have things on our schedules, right? Things that can't wait, things that are important and good things. And so I know very few of us have the luxury of ever just being, sitting back and being interrupted all day long on any given day. And that was the reality for Jesus as well. But there's intention behind when and how we can allow ourselves to be interrupted. And even if you can only give that person 5 minutes of your time, just be fully present to them for those full 5 minutes. For those of us who are followers of Jesus, love is a non-negotiable, right? I mean, Jesus taught it, he commanded it, and Jesus lived it so that we could love well and we could live a life of love. But even for those of us who are not followers of Jesus, I think most of us would agree that love is an admirable vision for our lives and the person that we want to be. And hurry is the antithesis of all of that. It's the antithesis of love. But love will not let hurry stand in the way of who is standing in front of you. And maybe for all of us, slowing down our lives so that we can do this and live this out better means choosing to live an interruptible life. So slow down, catch your breath, and move towards the interruptions this week. Let me pray for us. Lord, would you interrupt our hurried souls and teach us to live at the slow speed of love, so that with your help, Jesus, we can move toward the people in our lives and love them well. Amen. All right, Cypress, I know some of you are sitting there and you're wondering, so what happened to Jairus and his daughter? We never got to the end of that story. Well, it's all there in Mark chapter 5. So if you're not familiar with that, you can go read it on your own. All right. Thanks, Cypress. I'll see you on the patio.